They were the perfect couple, young, radiant, sailing into the horizon of a charmed life. Julia and Mark vanished on their honeymoon 7 years ago. No bodies, no distress call, just whispers, rumors, and a trail gone cold over open water. Now, the Lark, their sailboat, has reappeared, splintered, sun-bleached, and empty. But the sea never forgets. And some secrets don't stay drowned. What was once a tragic love story is about to unravel into something far darker. Inside the boat, something waits, and it's not silence. The ocean was a still sheet of metal gray when Hector spotted it, something bobbing, unnatural, just outside the reef break. He eased off the throttle of his trawler, squinting beneath the brim of his cracked cap. At first, he thought it was driftwood. Then he saw the bow, jagged like a ripped fingernail, breaching the surface. The sailboat was dead. Barnacles clawed up its white hull like tumors. The mast had snapped mid-height, hanging like a broken spine. A faded nameplate clung to one side, partially obscured by algae. The Lark. Hector's breath hitched. That name had been spoken in whispers around these parts for years. It was a ghost story told in low voices at bars on foggy nights. Two newlyweds, vanished, no wreckage, no storm, just gone. He radioed it in with a thick tongue and a dry throat. Found a wreck. Marked the Lark. Coordinates 44 degrees 33 minutes north, 63 degrees 31 minutes west. It's still floating, nobody on board. His fingers trembled as he turned the trawler to circle the hull. Something about the silence was wrong, not just eerie, watchful, as if the boat itself had witnessed something it couldn't forget. He threw a grappling hook and climbed aboard, his boots sloshing over seawater pooled across the deck. The air smelled of rot and salt and something else, like copper, blood maybe, or old metal. Inside the main cabin, sunlight shafted through a cracked skylight, illuminating ruin, overturned cabinets, torn cushions, a mold-eaten journal half buried in debris. He stepped closer, heart pounding, and saw the page splayed open. Day 6. He won't answer me. I think he knows I read the message. I think... The rest of the sentence trailed off in a rip of ink. Behind him, something creaked. He spun, but there was nothing. Only the hush of the ocean and the whisper of old sails flapping like a breath caught in a throat. The boat hadn't just drifted, it had returned. Claire dropped her phone twice before answering. It had rung once, a number she didn't recognize, Nova Scotia area code. Somewhere deep in her chest, a pressure swelled, like the tightening of lungs before a scream. 7 years of silence had taught her not to hope. But hope wasn't what she felt. Not exactly. Claire Renshaw? The voice on the other end asked, official but unsure. We believe we've located the Lark, the sailboat your sister Julia and her husband disappeared on. She sat down on the cold kitchen floor. The silence in the house felt louder than the voice. Her mug, still steaming, tipped over next to her. She didn't notice. What? She whispered, though the word didn't come out whole. There's no sign of remains, the caller added quickly. But the boat is intact, floating, minimal storm damage. It's being towed in now. Claire pressed her palm to her mouth, breath hot and shallow. She hadn't spoken Julia's name out loud in months, maybe longer. It was like touching a scar you'd convinced yourself had faded. She thought she was past this, past the grief, past the anger. But the call didn't bring back her sister. It brought back the question. Why had Julia looked so scared the day she left? She hadn't told anyone, not the police, not their parents. But the night before the wedding, Julia had come to her door barefoot, crying, whispering that something didn't feel right. Claire had chalked it up to pre-wedding panic, to nerves. She'd even laughed. Now her sister's face, bright, sunlit, trembling, filled her memory like a photograph submerged in water. Everything out of focus. Everything wrong. The lark was back, but Julia wasn't. Claire stood slowly, knees trembling, and picked up her phone again. "Can you send me a picture?" she asked. "Of the boat?" There was a long pause. "You'll want to see this for yourself," the caller said. "Something's carved into the helm. We can't explain it." The old USB drive was buried in the bottom drawer, beneath expired passports and Julia's last Christmas card. Claire plugged it into her laptop with trembling fingers, the screen flickering to life with a time-stamped file. Mark plus Julia wedding, June 16th, raw.mp4. She hadn't watched it in years. Couldn't. The sound of Julia's laugh used to undo her, but now, after the lark was found, she needed to see. Maybe there was something she'd missed. The video opened with chaos, shaky hands, people shouting to clear the aisle. Then Julia appeared in frame, radiant, wind in her veil, smiling with a nervous intensity that now struck Claire as practiced. Mark stood beside her, polished and unreadable. He looked handsome, sure, controlled. But watching now, Claire saw the little things. The way he kept glancing over his shoulder, how his smile faltered whenever Julia wasn't looking. Then came the vows. Julia's voice cracked halfway through hers. The mic picked up a murmur. "Sorry, I just..." before she quickly gathered herself. Mark's vows were brief, memorized. Claire had thought it was nerves, but now it felt like distance, as if he were reciting a role. The crowd clapped. The officiant pronounced them man and wife. Claire fast-forwarded. Reception, dancing, champagne. Julia dancing with her father, then with Claire. Mark standing by the railing, alone, staring at the sea. Watching him now, Claire felt a ripple of unease. He wasn't watching the celebration. He was watching something in the distance. Then came the last clip. Julia at the microphone, laughing. "I told Mark not to plan a long honeymoon or I'd never come back," she joked. The crowd laughed, but Mark didn't. He was out of frame. When the camera panned toward him, just for a moment, his expression was unreadable, not smiling, not clapping, just staring at Julia like a man memorizing something he was about to lose. Claire hit pause. Her heart pounded. There had been something wrong. They found the journal wedged beneath the navigation console, swollen with salt water and warped by time. A Coast Guard investigator slid it into a clear evidence bag as if afraid it might crumble at his touch. Claire received the call an hour later. "It's in her handwriting," the officer said. First names on the inside cover. Julia Renshaw Claire sat motionless on her couch, phone pressed to her ear. "What does it say?" The officer hesitated. "Some entries are legible. Most are smudged to hell. But one, the last one. We think you should see it." When they emailed her the scans, Claire's throat tightened the moment she opened the file. The handwriting, looped, slightly rushed, was unmistakable. Julia's voice seemed to whisper from the page, shaking as it reached across 7 years of silence. Day 6. Mark's acting strange. "He hasn't spoken to me since last night." "Not really. I caught him down below, writing something. Then he shut the hatch and locked it. He said it was work stuff. We're on our goddamn honeymoon." Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. "The radio's dead. He said the battery's fried, but I saw him remove something. I think he's lying. I think he knows I read the message. I think..." That was it. The sentence cut off abruptly. Ink smeared as though the pen had slipped or been ripped from her hand. Claire stared at it, frozen. "Message?" she whispered. "What message?" She pulled open her own journal from years ago, her therapy journal from when Julia disappeared. Scrawled pages of memories, grief, rage. She flipped to the page dated 2 weeks after the disappearance. One note, circled twice in red pen. Jay said something in her vows, a joke. But was it a joke? If I don't come back? Claire pressed a hand over her mouth. Whatever Julia had read, it scared her. And whatever she had been about to write. Someone didn't let her finish. Noah Avery hadn't heard his brother's name in years, not spoken aloud, at least. But when the news ticker ran across the bottom of the TV screen, missing honeymoon boat the Lark, recovered after 7 years. His hand froze mid-pour. Coffee sloshed over the counter. He didn't notice. He stared at the name on the screen, then the photo. Julia and Mark, smiling, frozen in time. A sudden pressure swelled behind his ribs, an ache so sharp it nearly brought him to his knees. He turned the TV off, sat in the quiet of his cluttered kitchen. The silence screamed. He had warned Mark once, or tried to. 7 years ago, 2 days before the wedding, Mark had come to Noah's apartment in Boston, drunk, jaw tight, knuckles scraped, said he didn't want to get married, said he wasn't ready. But his eyes had said something else entirely. They were full of fear. "What aren't you telling me?" Noah had asked him. "What did you do?" Mark had just laughed. Not the real kind. The empty kind, like air escaping a wound. The next day, Mark ghosted. Went through with the wedding. And Noah didn't go. He didn't tell the police any of it when they came around after the disappearance. What was he supposed to say? My brother got drunk and spooked before his wedding and now they're both gone? But now, with the boat recovered, empty, and that old photo flooding the news, it all came roaring back, especially the last message Mark ever sent him, a voicemail, never returned. One Noah had saved but hadn't listened to in full since. He played it now, fingers trembling. Mark's voice frayed at the edges. If anything happens to me, don't look for answers. Please, Noah, just forget it. Forget me. But forgetting was no longer an option. Mark was gone. And Noah knew in the pit of his gut that his brother hadn't drowned. He had run from something. Or someone. By morning, Claire's inbox was a war zone. TikTok theories, YouTube thumbnails of Julia's wedding dress with ominous piano music, Reddit threads dissecting every second of the recovered wedding footage. The words "the Lark" were trending globally. Julia and Mark, ghosts for 7 years, were suddenly the internet's newest obsession. Claire hadn't slept. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from a number she didn't recognize. Check Reddit. They found the honeymoon itinerary. There were 2 one-way tickets, no returns. She swallowed hard, refreshed her feed, dozens of theories, wild speculation. Some called it a murder-suicide. Others thought they'd faked their deaths. Some even claimed a sea cult was involved. But one post stuck out. A direct message. Anonymous. No profile photo. They never planned to come back. That was it. No signature, no follow-up. Claire stared at it, a chill sliding between her shoulder blades. She wanted to delete it, block them. Instead, she responded, "Who are you?" No answer, just the blinking dot, and then it vanished. In her kitchen, the TV flickered with B-roll footage of the Lark being hauled into port. Reporters swarmed the dock, flashbulbs, static. A talking head recited a timeline Claire knew by heart. Married June 16th, vanished June 23rd, last seen near Sable Island. No storms, no distress call, nothing. Until now. A knock at her door made her jump. She opened it to find a man in a windbreaker, holding a press badge and a camcorder. His eyes were too bright, hungry. "Miss Renshaw, mind if we ask how you feel knowing your sister's journal was found with the words, 'He knows I read the message'? Can you confirm what that message was?" Claire slammed the door without a word. She leaned against it, breath shallow. Whatever Julia had discovered, it wasn't just between her and Mark. Someone else knew, and they were watching Claire now, too. The docks hadn't changed. Same rusted cleats, same chipped white paint along the handrails. Even the air smelled the same, brine and diesel and a faint sweetness from the tarred rope. Claire walked slowly, her boots echoing on the planks, each step tightening something inside her chest. She hadn't been here since that day, since she hugged Julia goodbye under an overcast sky. The morning was chilly then too, just like now. Early summer had that strange quality, warm if you stood still, cold if you moved. That day, Claire had moved too fast, too eager to let Julia begin her new life. Now she wished she'd held on. The flashbacks came without asking. The sound of Julia's laugh, the way she'd looped her arm through Mark's as they walked toward the Lark, waving back like they'd be gone a week, not forever. Claire stopped at the exact spot. The mooring was still there, rope curled like a question mark. She stared at the space the boat had once filled, now empty. Her hand gripped the railing. Then, a whisper. Not in the wind, inside her head. Something Julia had said that day. A moment Claire hadn't thought about in years. Julia had leaned in for a hug, cheek pressed to hers, and whispered something into her ear, low, quick. Claire had forgotten it until now. Her fingers tightened on the railing. What was it? Her mind scrambled for it. The memory hovered just beyond reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. She closed her eyes. Julia's voice barely audible. If something happens, it's in the stars. Claire's eyes flew open. She hadn't understood it then. Thought it was a poetic flourish, Julia being dramatic or romantic. But now, it sounded like a warning. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from the Coast Guard. Recovered something sealed in the bow compartment. You should see this in person. Claire's breath caught. Whatever was in the stars, Julia hadn't meant fate. She'd meant coordinates, or a clue. Something left behind, hidden, something waiting to be found. The folder slid across the metal table with a dull whisper. Claire sat stiff-backed in the Coast Guard's Coastal Operations Office, a flickering fluorescent light overhead, casting shadows across the file's red-stamped label, Operation Black Tide, June 23, 2018. Status incomplete. The officer, Commander Fields, cleared his throat. Mid-50s, clean-cut, sun-leathered skin. We don't usually release these without significant legal pressure, but your sister's journal, plus the boat resurfacing, changed things. Claire opened the folder with deliberate hands. Inside, sonar scans, nautical charts, photographs, and internal memos dated within days of Julia and Mark's disappearance. She scanned the first few pages, standard protocol, search grid coordinates, weather patterns, calm, no signs of mechanical failure. But then she turned the page and froze. Report number 14-07-B. Submerged object, unidentified. The image was grainy, a deep-sea sonar scan. Amidst the shifting contours of the ocean floor was something man-made. Not the Lark, something larger, angular, like the tail of a small aircraft or a hatch of some kind. Her eyes flicked to the accompanying report, but half of it was redacted. Thick black lines crossed out whole paragraphs. Only a few phrases were visible. Subsurface anomaly. Does not correspond to any registered wreck. Ordered to suspend dive. Classified under external directive. Claire looked up. What is this? Commander Fields didn't meet her eyes. It was outside our jurisdiction. Navy swept in. Told us to back off. Official story was drift error. She pointed to the sonar image. This wasn't a drift error. It's near where they vanished. He sighed. There's a piece of the puzzle missing, and someone doesn't want it found. Claire's hands shook slightly as she flipped to the next page. Last entry, June 25th, 2018. Subject, signal interference. Radio blackout anomaly. Duration, 19 minutes. Approximate location, 44 degrees, 16 minutes north, 60 degrees, 40 minutes west. Her eyes narrowed. That location was northeast of Sable Island, exactly where the Lark had reappeared. And that blackout? It happened 2 days after the last sighting of Julia and Mark. Claire closed the file slowly. They didn't just vanish. Something else was out there. The fisherman's hands were still raw from the rope when Claire met him. His name was Thomas Beliveau, 61, lifelong Nova Scotian, known in the harbor as the man who could smell a storm an hour before it hit. His boat, the Marie Claire, now sat quietly in the slip beside the Coast Guard dock. But it wasn't his vessel people were whispering about. It was the Lark. "She looked dead when I found her," Tomas said, rubbing a thumb over the calloused ridge of his other hand. "Like something the sea forgot to bury." Claire leaned in. "You said you saw something carved into the helm?" Tomas nodded, eyes shadowed beneath his battered cap. "Wasn't rust or barnacle, miss? Fresh? Like it'd been done hours ago, not years. The wood was lighter where the blade scraped it." "What did it say?" His voice dropped. "Don't trust him." Claire's breath caught. "You're sure?" "Clear as a prayer," he said. "I radioed it in, told the crew to tow it in carefully. But when the Coast Guard boys came on board, it was gone." "Gone how?" He shook his head. "Scrubbed. Like someone took a knife and planed it clean, smooth as driftwood. Not a mark left." Claire blinked. "That's not possible. They were only minutes behind you." Tomas leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There was something else. I didn't say it earlier because I knew it sounded crazy, but I saw a flash just before I boarded, from below deck. Thought maybe it was the sun catching glass. But now, I'm not so sure." Claire felt the cold settle deeper into her chest. Whoever, or whatever, had left that message didn't want it found. Or maybe it wasn't meant for her. Maybe it was meant for someone else who was still watching. The sea was a mirror that morning, still, endless, almost too perfect. Julia leaned over the railing, sunglasses perched on her sun-kissed nose, bare feet pressing into the smooth deck of the Lark. The sail creaked softly above her, catching the wind like a whisper. She turned and smiled toward Mark, who was adjusting the GPS console near the helm. "You ever seen water this clear?" she called, her voice still giddy from the last 72 hours of champagne and adrenaline. Mark glanced up. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It's peaceful." She patted toward him, arms wrapping around his waist from behind. "Peaceful is good. You did just marry me, after all." He laughed, but it was shallow, distracted. "Yeah, I did." She frowned slightly against his back. His muscles were tense. He'd been like this since they left the marina, checking the compass too often, tapping the radio even though they weren't far enough offshore to need it. "Mark," she said, stepping around to face him, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Hey, what's going on? You're not here." "I'm fine," he said too quickly. "Just running through protocols. I don't want anything going wrong out here. It's our honeymoon. The only protocol is sunscreen and making out." He smiled again, this time warmer, and leaned down to kiss her. For a moment the tension broke. They laughed. They clinked glasses. She laid her head on his shoulder while the water lapped softly against the hull. But later, when Julia dozed in the sun, Mark moved quietly below deck. He locked the hatch behind him, opened a small metal case from his duffel. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, was a single envelope. No address, no name. He stared at it, lips pressed thin, then pulled out a notebook from the shelf. He began to write. his handwriting sharp, precise. At the top of the page, "If she finds this." Above deck, the sky darkened slightly. Julia stirred, frowning in her sleep. The box was tucked behind photo albums and a shoebox of old Christmas ornaments, exactly where Julia had hidden everything important. Claire found it on impulse after waking in the middle of the night with one phrase looping through her head. "If something happens, it's in the stars." She didn't know what it meant, not exactly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Julia had left a breadcrumb, somewhere only she would know to look. The box creaked open. Old receipts, a dried corsage from prom, and then, folded in a faded envelope marked only with her own name, Claire. Her breath hitched. She sat on the edge of the bed and slid the letter out carefully. The ink was slightly smeared, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Julia's, slanted and rushed. She read, "Claire, I don't know if I'll ever send this. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Maybe I'm wrong about him. God, I hope I'm wrong. But if you're reading this, something's happened. Mark isn't who I thought he was. He's hiding something. I found a letter, something he brought on board. He tried to tell me it was nothing, but it's not. It's not." The message said, "Delivery must occur. One survivor ensures silence." What does that mean? Why does he have it? He's changed. At night, I wake up and he's just standing there, watching me, not saying a word. If anything happens, promise me you'll read this. Promise me you won't stop asking questions. Promise me you won't trust him. You're the only one I ever told the truth. You always were. Love. J. Claire's hands were trembling. The words, "One survivor ensures silence," echoed like a gunshot in her skull. She stared at the paper, the weight of it unbearable. It wasn't just fear in Julia's voice. It was certainty. She knew something was coming, and she'd left this as her will, not for the police, not for her husband, for Claire. Noah hadn't touched his brother's laptop in 7 years. It had sat, powered off and dusty, in a locked cabinet at their parents' old place in Concord, untouched since the week the honeymooners vanished. Now it buzzed to life on his kitchen table, screen flickering before stabilizing. The password was easy. Mark always used the same one. The year their father died. That never changed. What Noah found first were just normal things. Emails, spreadsheets, weather tracking software. But he wasn't looking for the obvious. He opened a backdoor script, something he'd written in college when they used to share a digital wallet for poker nights and under-the-table crypto investments. If Mark was hiding money, this would trace it. The code ran. Lines of data scrolled. Then it hit. A silent ping. One account. Offshore. Cayman Islands. Cleared and emptied 7 years ago, exactly 3 days before they set sail. Amount, $387,000. Noah's mouth went dry. That wasn't honeymoon money. That was get out and disappear money. He pulled up the transaction log. The deposit started 6 months before the wedding, small at first, then growing. Steady, quiet, but it was the note attached to the final transfer that made Noah's stomach turn. Delivery secured. Insurance set. No return. He pushed back from the table, bile rising in his throat. His brother hadn't just planned something. He'd funded it, meticulously, secretly, and Julia hadn't known. Or maybe she had, and that's why she died. Noah stared at the screen. His hand hovered over the print command, but instead, he copied everything to a flash drive. Claire needed to see this. There was one more thing, an odd detail buried in the bank metadata. The IP used to access the account last week, not 7 years ago, last week. Someone had logged in again. Mark was supposed to be dead, so who the hell was using his account? Claire didn't know what made her dig through the old box of chargers and SIM cards. maybe desperation, maybe instinct. The same box she hadn't touched since her last phone died 10 years ago, shortly after Julia vanished. She found it. Her old rose gold iPhone 6, scratched and dulled with time. It wouldn't even power on at first. But after an hour of coaxing and the right cable, it blinked awake. A ghost in her palm. She scrolled absently through the past. Old photos, forgotten texts, frozen fragments of a life that broke the day the lark disappeared. Then the red dot. One unheard voicemail. Her breath caught. She tapped it. The timestamp, June 22nd, 11:39 p.m. The night before Julia and Mark set sail. The message clicked to life. Julia's voice came through, shaky, low, almost whispering. "Claire, I didn't want to leave this on your voicemail, but I think something's wrong. Something's off. Mark, he's not sleeping. He's been checking the anchor chain over and over, keeps asking me if I've touched his things." A pause, breathing, then more urgency. "I found a letter in his bag. It's not addressed to anyone. It just says, 'One survivor ensures silence.' Claire, he won't let me leave. He keeps saying we have to finish the plan. I don't know what that means." Another pause. Shallow, scared breath. "If something happens to me, it's not an accident. Promise me you'll look into it. Don't let them bury me under some storm that never came." Click. Silence. Claire just stared, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock. Her sister had reached out hours before the disappearance, and she hadn't heard her, not until now. She played it again, and this time, she noticed something else. At the very end, just before the click, there was a second voice, barely audible, male, clipped. "Why are you on the phone?" Then the line cut. Claire's hands went cold. Mark was right there, listening. The sky broke fast. One moment it was a crisp cobalt stretch above them, and the next, black, heavy, pulsing with something electric. The lark pitched hard to starboard, its mast groaning as the wind caught it broadside. Julia clutched the table below deck, journal open, pen scratching wildly across the damp page. Salt water dripped from her hair onto the paper, smearing the ink. June 23rd. This storm came out of nowhere. Mark says it's normal, but the barometer dropped 30 points in 10 minutes. I think he knew. I think he's waiting for something. She looked toward the hatch. Above, Mark's boots slammed across the deck. "Secure the sail," he shouted, to her or to no one. His voice vanished into the wind. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the hull. Julia jumped, then turned the page. I found the second envelope. It wasn't sealed. The paper inside said, "When the signal's cut, deliver and return. One only." What does that mean? What signal? What delivery? She underlined one only twice. Her fingers trembled as she capped the pen. Then, she heard it. A voice. Not Mark's. Outside. Muffled through the walls of the boat. But there. A man. Yelling something over the storm. Just one phrase, over and over. "You're not cleared. Abort. Do you hear me?" Abort. Julia's blood turned to ice. She scrambled up the ladder, flung the hatch open, and was hit by the blinding rain, the scream of the wind. Mark stood at the helm, eyes wild, drenched, lips moving, but not speaking to her. He was talking into something, an old shortwave unit she'd never seen before. It was connected to a battery pack hidden beneath the nav console. The second voice crackled again, sharp and panicked. "Wrong time, wrong location. You weren't supposed to launch," Mark shouted back. "We're past the point. It's done." He turned and saw her. For a beat, they locked eyes. And in that instant, Julia knew. This wasn't a storm. It was a cover for whatever Mark had just unleashed. Claire paused the surveillance footage again. Frame 4172. She'd watched the tape 20 times already. The marina's grainy night vision feed wasn't forgiving. Motion blur turned everything into smears of light and shadow. But this frame? It was different. There, between the dock light and the Lark's stern ladder, a figure appeared. Not Julia, not Mark, someone else. Too broad-shouldered to be her sister, moving with purpose, carrying a duffel slung low. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., just hours before the boat was scheduled to depart. The official log said the couple left at sunrise, alone, but the figure had climbed aboard under cover of night. Claire leaned forward, staring at the stranger's outline. No face, no clear identifying features, just a presence, a trespasser. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked forward frame by frame. The figure knelt on the deck, then disappeared below. 36 seconds later, the screen glitched. Static bars wiped across the feed. When the image returned, the deck was empty. No exit, no trace. Claire felt her stomach twist. She rewound it again. Same glitch, same vanishing act. She grabbed her phone, dialing the harbor master who'd helped her pull the archived feed. "Are you sure that's the only footage?" she asked. "Positive," he said. "That camera's been there 10 years. Angle never changed." "Was anyone else scheduled to board the Lark that night?" "Just the Newlyweds." Claire's eyes flicked back to the screen. Then who the hell was that? She sat in silence for a moment, watching the figure climb aboard, over and over. Then her eyes narrowed. The duffel. Its side had something white on it, barely visible in the light. A number. She enhanced the frame. It wasn't clear, but it looked like 67-2A. Claire's heart skipped. That wasn't a serial number. It was a designation, and it matched the edge code stamped on the envelope she'd found in Mark's old journal. Whoever boarded the Lark that night was never supposed to leave a trace. The ocean was calm, but there was tension in the air, as if the sea itself remembered. 100 yards offshore from where the Lark had drifted aground, a white Zodiac bobbed silently. Below, in full wetsuit and rebreather, Eli Shaw descended into the murky blue. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't Coast Guard. He was freelance, a deep-sea diver hired by a popular investigative podcast to sniff out something juicier than sonar blips and bureaucratic shrugs. 20 feet down, the Lark's hull loomed like a ghost from the shadows. The barnacles had grown thick over 7 years. Time and tide had warped her beauty into something feral. Eli ran his gloved fingers along the underside, checking the points of impact where the boat had cracked when it surfaced. Then he froze. A glint. He leaned closer, shining his wrist light on the mass of twisted barnacles and algae near the stern's rudder housing. There, embedded just beneath the growth, something metallic. He pried carefully with a rusted paint scraper. The first object popped loose with a flick, a ring. Slim. Gold. The inside barely legible. He turned it slowly in the waterlight. JM, always, June 18th. Eli's breath hitched in the mask, a wedding ring. Julia and Mark's anniversary was June 18th. He tapped the GoPro strapped to his shoulder. "Recording," he whispered through his regulator. But then something else caught his eye, nestled further in the crevice, smaller, irregular, dull gray-white. He reached for it slowly. It resisted, then gave. He brought it to his mask for inspection. It wasn't coral or shell. It was a human molar, root intact. No fillings, no decay. He surfaced fast, heart racing, the Zodiac rising into view above. On the deck, his assistant leaned over. "Find anything?" Eli hauled himself up, dripping, adrenaline surging. He didn't answer, just held out the 2 items, the ring and the tooth. Proof that someone had died on the Lark, and someone else had made sure they stayed hidden. The lighthouse stood crooked on the cliff, like a forgotten guardian, its red dome long faded, its glass shattered in places by salt and wind. Officially decommissioned in 2002. Unofficially, it was still used by fishermen during storms, and, apparently, once by someone else. Claire climbed the winding staircase with Noah behind her, each step creaking under the weight of their shared dread. The air smelled like mold, rust, and old seawater. They found the logbook in a steel drawer beside the emergency radio. Dust coated its leather cover. Inside, handwritten entries stretched back decades. "Start with June 23rd, Claire said. Day of the storm." Noah flipped carefully, the old pages stiff and stained. Then he stopped. His finger landed on an entry, scrawled in thick, shaking pen. June 23rd, 3:14 a.m. Boat docked below. Sloop type. Name unclear. Storm blurred. Possibly Lark? 3 aboard. 2 came up. Man and woman. 3rd stayed below. Woman agitated. Left quickly. Man offered cash. I refused. Told them the beacon was down. They left within 10 minutes. Something didn't feel right. Logged it anyway. Claire's skin prickled. 3 aboard, she whispered. That's not a mistake. Noah nodded grimly. And the woman was agitated. That has to be Julia. He turned the page. Another note, added in pencil later. Checked shoreline at dawn. Found broken radio casing. Same model as Coast Guard issued. No bodies. No signs of distress flare. Claire stared at the entry. The keeper didn't know it then, but he'd just written down the only independent sighting of the Lark, with a 3rd person on board after it allegedly set out alone. She looked out the lighthouse window, the sea endless and gray. They were being followed, she said softly, or escorted. Noah met her eyes. Or someone was planted on that boat before it ever left the dock. Claire closed the logbook and whispered the question now burning in both their minds. Who was the 3rd passenger? The wind had died, but tension howled below deck. Julia stood at the navigation console, holding Mark's phone in a death grip. Her face was pale, sea-slicked, the color drained from her lips. "Who is Delgado?" she asked, her voice low, trembling with fury. "Why would someone send you a message saying, 'Confirm 1 asset only, dispose the 2nd'?" Mark's jaw clenched. He didn't answer. "I found it in your hidden folder," she went on. "The one you thought I wouldn't see, along with 6 encrypted notes from some ZR." She flung the phone across the cabin. It hit the wall with a sickening crack, bouncing off into a corner. Mark stepped forward, slow, measured. "You shouldn't have gone through my stuff." "Don't twist this, Mark. This isn't about privacy. This is about a deal you're hiding, a person you're hiding." She turned and slammed her hand on the radio. "I'm calling the Coast Guard." Mark didn't move. Julia flipped the switch. Static. Nothing. She frowned, then tried the backup frequency. Still, nothing. The antenna light blinked red, cut. Her stomach dropped. "You disabled the radio." Mark finally spoke, his voice cold now. "I had to." "Had to?" She backed away, her shoulder brushing the galley counter. "You planned this. You were never supposed to see the messages. I'm not some liability you get to clean up, Mark." She reached for the emergency flare gun stowed near the hatch. He stepped forward fast, grabbing her wrist. They struggled, hands slippery with salt and sweat, fury and fear building in waves. The flare gun fell, clattering to the floor. "I loved you," she spat, tears hot in her eyes. Mark stared at her, breath heavy. "I still do," he said quietly. And that terrified her more than anything. Because love wasn't what was left in his eyes. It was resolve. Noah sat hunched over his laptop, blue light casting shadows across his unshaven face. The deeper he dug, the darker things got. Mark's email history had been mostly scrubbed. Someone had wiped the inbox months before the disappearance. But they missed one thing: a single, unsent draft. It was tucked away under a decoy folder labeled Tide Charts. The message was short: to cblack67@protonmail.com. Subject: drop confirmed. 6/24, no leak. Contact post delivery only. Noah's fingers flew across the keyboard. He ran the address through private web databases, then through older law enforcement archive leaks. And there it was: Christopher Black, convicted in 2003 for aiding a doomsday cult's oceanic migration. Later released. Disappeared to the Caribbean. Rumored to have rebranded as an offshore guide. Someone who specialized in getting people in and out of international waters without leaving a trail. He didn't smuggle drugs. He smuggled people. Black had resurfaced in a Reddit whistleblower thread 5 years ago, tied to a vessel used in an untraceable disappearance. The victim was never found, just like Julia. Noah whispered, "What the hell were you into, Mark?" He dug deeper, found a forum post linked to Black's alias. The profile listed a simple bio: one way, no refunds, I don't do retrieval. Then a phone number, encrypted, masked through 3 relays. But someone had recently tried to ping that number, from Nova Scotia, just 2 weeks ago. Noah stared at the screen, heart hammering. If Mark was dead, someone else was picking up the trail, keeping the arrangement alive, cleaning up loose ends. He downloaded every trace, loaded it onto a flash drive, and backed it up twice. Then he texted Claire. "Found something. You need to see this in person. It's worse than we thought." He glanced back at the glowing screen, at Mark's draft email, at the name no one had ever mentioned in any official report. Whoever Christopher Black was, Mark hadn't just known him, he trusted him with the plan. Claire stood on the rocky bluff above the cove, the sea below crashing in slow, thunderous rhythm. She hadn't spoken in 10 minutes. The wind tugged at her jacket, hair whipped across her face, but she didn't move. Noah waited beside her, holding the flash drive like it was radioactive. "I don't know where this ends," he finally said. Claire's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I do." He looked over. She didn't turn to him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, far past the wreckage, far past the water, into whatever space she had stored the grief for 7 years. "She was trying to tell me," she said. "The voicemail, the texts, the wedding day. There were things she didn't say, things I ignored. You couldn't have known." Claire finally turned to face him, eyes glassy and red. "She told me she was scared of how fast it was all happening. Said Mark was charming but hollow. That sometimes when he looked at her, it was like she didn't exist." Her voice cracked. "And I told her it was just cold feet." Her shoulders shook. "I told her, don't sabotage something just because you're scared." Like her fear was some childish impulse, like I knew better. Noah moved toward her slowly. "She got on that boat thinking she was overreacting, but I think she was trying to run. I think she wanted out." Claire wiped at her face, furious with herself. "And I didn't see it. I didn't see it." Noah said nothing. There was no comfort big enough for that kind of guilt. "I was her sister. I was supposed to know." Claire finally collapsed to her knees, sobs racking her chest in violent, helpless waves. Years of silence tore open all at once, and Noah did the only thing he could. He knelt beside her and held her, while the sea kept crashing below them, slow, steady, unbothered, like it had all the time in the world to bury what it took. The cabin stank of diesel and blood. Julia's hand slipped on the wheel, one palm shredded from the jagged edge of the companionway. She'd slammed into it when the boat lurched, no help, no warning, just a sickening crash and the sound of something heavy falling below. She hadn't seen Mark in hours. He had gone below during the lull after the storm, silent, cold-eyed. Then nothing. When she called for him, the silence answered. She tried the engine again. Click, click, nothing. Only the whisper of waves slapping the hull and the groan of torn rigging in the wind. She grabbed the flare gun from the bench beside her, reloaded now, the safety off, and climbed above deck. The sea stretched around her like a mouth waiting to close. She turned the wheel toward the coordinates she'd memorized from his journal. 45.220 north, 62.588 west, a red X, scribbled 3 times, circled in ink darker than all the rest. A place he hadn't wanted her to see. Her body ached. Blood soaked the waistband of her jeans. Her thoughts felt blurry, unstitched. Then, a splash, not distant, not a wave. Close. She froze. Heart hammering, she crept to the edge of the stern, eyes scanning the black water. It was moonless, inky, and vast. Another splash. This time, behind her. She spun. Nothing. Just the mainsail flapping in tatters, ropes dragging across the deck like lifeless arms. She backed toward the helm, every hair on her skin rising. The flare gun shook in her hand. Then she heard it. A breath, human, coming from the forward hatch. She knew without needing to look, she wasn't alone. Not anymore. And whoever had stayed behind after Mark disappeared had waited until she was truly alone to surface. Julia raised the flare gun slowly. "I know you're there," she whispered. And the breath, calm, deliberate, replied, "Then why did you come back?" The lab report came in at 2:11 a.m. Claire read it twice, each word sinking like lead into her chest. Trace DNA samples confirmed on interior hatch handle, forward bunk, and galley railing. Male, unknown, not Mark, not Julia. Noah leaned over her shoulder, scanning the details. "They isolated a partial print," he said. "Too degraded for a match, but definitely not either of them." Claire's voice was thin. "So there was a third person on the boat." Noah nodded grimly. "And they never came back." The samples weren't from some earlier guest or charter. The forensic timeline was clear. They were deposited within 72 hours of the boat's disappearance. The same window Julia had sent her final voicemail. Claire turned to the crime board they'd built in the motel room. Red thread traced everything: receipts, map routes, printouts of Mark's emails, a faded photo of Julia on her wedding day, laughing like she didn't already suspect something was wrong. And now, a new photo, blown up from marina footage, blurry but chilling. The unknown man climbing aboard the Lark at 2:14 a.m. "I think he was the one giving orders," Noah said. "Mark wasn't the architect. He was the carrier." Claire stared at the DNA code printed across the report. One line stuck out more than the rest. Microscopic trace of epoxy resin found beneath unknown male's fingernails. Marine grade. Industrial. Not from a tourist. Not from a sailor. From someone who worked on boats. Or dismantled them. "He wasn't just a passenger," Claire whispered. "He installed something. Or tampered with something before they set sail." She thought of the radio failure. The missing emergency gear. The way the GPS had been hardwired off course. "This wasn't sabotage," she said. "It was a setup." She pinned the report beside the figure on the deck. 3 people went out on the Lark. Only one identity remained unknown, and he had never intended to come back. Eli had been diving wrecks for 20 years, but something about the Lark haunted him. Like it wasn't just lost, it had been erased. He swept beneath the collapsed starboard galley, his handlight cutting through clouds of silt and algae. The broken hull had split deeper than he'd expected. Sharp fragments of wood and fiberglass jutted like ribs from a torn carcass. Then something glinted, not metal. He swam closer, a rectangular shape, half buried in sand and grit. He brushed it free. A phone. encased in a commercial-grade waterproof bag, tethered with nylon cord looped through a rusted railing bracket. Not dropped, hidden. He surfaced 10 minutes later, wheezing from the cold, heart pounding. On deck, his assistant unsealed the bag, careful not to trigger anything. The phone buzzed as it powered up. No lock screen, just a single voice memo, unplayed. Claire held her breath as Eli tapped it. Julia's voice, weak and strained, spilled out, recorded in the tight dark. If someone finds this, he isn't who he says he is. Shaky breath. I don't know if I'll make it to shore. The radio's dead. Mark thinks I'm sleeping, but I saw the messages. He was never going to take me to Newfoundland. That was never real. Silence, then softer. There's someone else. I heard him talking last night. There were numbers, a drop point. Mark's in over his head, but the other man, he's dangerous. This isn't a honeymoon. It's a transaction. Claire's hand shook. The phone slipped from her grip and clattered onto the deck. Eli picked it up silently. She knew, he said. She knew, and no one listened. Claire looked out at the horizon, her voice barely audible. She didn't just disappear. She tried to warn us. The final words on the recording echoed in her mind. Please, tell Claire I tried. A whisper in the dark. 7 years underwater, now finally heard. Claire sat in the motel bathtub, fully clothed, the sound of the voice memo still playing in her head, Julia's voice, cracking but alive. She had listened to it 6 times, not for new words, there were none, but for tone, pauses, the tremor in Julia's breath. Why would she get on that boat with him? Why say yes in the first place? Claire closed her eyes, breathing slow, water dripping from the faucet like a metronome ticking down a memory. Then, she saw it. Julia at her rehearsal dinner. Quiet. Glowing but oddly distant. Her laugh a half-second late. And later, alone with Claire, she had said, I don't believe in fairy tales, but I believe in surviving. At the time, Claire had brushed it off as bridal nerves, but now? That wasn't love. That was resignation, a calculation. She grabbed Julia's old leather-bound journal, recovered from a sealed bag in the wreck. The last few entries were scattered, as if written in panic. Then one line hit her like a gut punch. I'll give him what he wants, until I know where it leads. If I disappear, it's because I followed the trail too far, Claire whispered aloud. She married him to expose him. Julia hadn't fallen into a trap. She'd walked in eyes open, trying to trace something darker than anyone suspected. Whatever Mark was tied up in, it wasn't just shady offshore money or identity games. It was people, movements, deals that couldn't be made on land. And Julia, always the quiet one, the one who read people too well, had seen it before the rest. Claire stood, journal pressed to her chest like a heartbeat. She was never running, she murmured. She was hunting. And Mark? He was just the bait. Claire noticed the shift before he spoke. Noah had gone quiet, not the focused kind of quiet, but haunted. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table of the rented room, the motel curtains drawn tight against the morning light. Between them lay the voice memo, Julia's journal, and the latest coordinates she'd mapped. Claire had been talking about the epoxy resin, about the third man, about how Julia must have known. But Noah's eyes weren't there. They were somewhere years behind. Noah, she said gently, what is it? He looked up, jaw clenched. Then, finally, I knew what Mark was capable of. Claire froze. Noah stood, pacing, hands knotted in his hair. It was 8 years ago, before Julia, before the Lark. We were in New Hampshire. Mark was dating a girl named Erin, just for a few months. She was wild but kind. Too kind, he swallowed. One night, We were drinking on the cliffs near Rye Harbor, just us three. I went to get the truck. They stayed back. When I came back, she was gone. Claire's voice cracked. Gone how? Noah turned to her, ashamed. Mark said she slipped, that she leaned back and fell. Said he tried to save her, but it was too dark. Claire's breath hitched. I wanted to call it in, but he begged me. Said the cops would never believe him. He was high, had warrants. Aaron had bruises from a fight 2 nights before. He swore it was an accident. Claire was pale now. So you helped him? I panicked, Noah whispered. I helped move her. We left her downstream, staged it like she drowned. A hiker found her days later. It was ruled misadventure. Silence stretched. I thought, maybe it was an accident. But when Julia vanished, when I saw the same lies... He broke off. Claire's hands trembled, voice raw. You let her marry him. I didn't think you knew. The room seemed to constrict, thick with guilt and unsaid things. Noah looked at her with wet eyes. I've been trying to make it right ever since. But Claire didn't answer, because some sins didn't get redemption, only reckoning. Claire sat stiff-backed in her parents' sunroom, the air thick with lemon polish and denial. The same teacups had been laid out on the lace doily table as always, everything unchanged, untouched by the hurricane of reality slamming outside their little world. Her mother Judith poured Earl Grey as if they were simply catching up. Claire didn't touch hers. Did you know about him? She asked flatly. Her father looked up from the newspaper, puzzled. About who, sweetheart? Julia's boyfriend. Before Mark, Judith's hand trembled slightly. The teapot clinked against the porcelain edge. She never said much, her mother murmured. Claire leaned forward. His name was Eric McCullen. Julia filed a police report after he broke her wrist, but the charges didn't stick. Her father's face went rigid. Judith looked away. She was terrified of him, Claire continued. And when Mark showed up, offering escape, she ran right into it. Into him. And you. Her voice rose. You encouraged the wedding. You pushed for it. Judith's eyes filled but didn't fall. She was unraveling, she whispered. Waking up in the night. Locking her doors. That boy had a hold on her and we thought, maybe a clean slate, someone stable, polite, would save her. Mark wasn't a clean slate, Claire snapped. He was a con. You gift-wrapped her to a different monster. Her father slammed the table. We did what we could. Claire stood, fists clenched. You let fear of scandal matter more than her safety. She didn't tell us the whole truth, Judith said softly. She never does. She tried. You just didn't listen. Claire turned to leave, fire rising in her chest. But just before she reached the door, her mother's voice stopped her. There was a letter. She mailed it the day before the wedding. We never opened it. Judith reached into a drawer and handed Claire a sealed envelope. Julia's handwriting on the front. To be opened only if I don't come back. The sea raged like it knew what was coming. Julia's fingers were blistered raw from prying the emergency raft free. The wind howled against her body, hair whipping across her salt-streaked face. She had waited until after midnight, waited until she heard Mark snoring below deck. Drugged, she hoped, from the crushed pills she had slipped into his whiskey. The emergency beacon was gone. Cut from its cradle. She didn't have time to think. She shoved the raft overboard, hands trembling, heart beating so loud it drowned the waves. Then, a thud. From behind her. She spun. Mark stood at the top of the companionway, shirtless, face half-shadowed in moonlight. His eyes, glassy, detached, fixed on the raft drifting just beyond the reach of the boat. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. You weren't even going to say goodbye? Julia reached behind her, clutching the flare gun she'd hidden earlier. Get away from me. He stepped forward, blood on his knuckles, something dark smeared across his chest. You read the journal. You think you understand, but you don't. I know everything now, she hissed. The coordinates, the drop point, who you were working with. Mark's face cracked, not rage, resignation. They were going to pay enough to start over. We'd disappear, live free. I don't want to disappear, she shouted. I want out. She fired. The flare screamed past his shoulder, lighting the night in crimson. Mark lunged. They crashed onto the slick deck, bodies colliding with the sick thud of flesh and bone. Julia kicked, screamed, scratched at his face. Don't do this, he yelled. I didn't want it this way. But it was this way. She shoved him back hard. He slipped on the soaked deck, hit the rail, and vanished. One splash, then silence. Julia stumbled to the edge, eyes wide, breath frozen, no head surfaced, no call for help, just the dark water swallowing what was left of him. She collapsed beside the raft rope, sobbing, alone, again. This time, for real. Noah stared at the manifest Claire had pulled from the dry sealed pouch hidden beneath the Lark's hull panel, an official-looking document stamped with a Bahamian registry and a falsified route. But the signatures didn't match the known logs. And the departure date? 2 full days before Julia and Mark's honeymoon. This isn't a shipping manifest, Claire whispered. It's a smuggling record. They spread the papers across the motel bed. Cargo codes, transfer coordinates, crew aliases. One box was highlighted in yellow, scrawled beside a handwritten number. Payload, 2, human, temp storage. Hold A, Claire's blood ran cold. Julia and Mark were the shipment. Noah sat down hard. This whole trip, it wasn't about sailing, it was about handing them off. But something went wrong, Claire said. Julia caught on, she fought. Mark tried to salvage it. Noah pointed to a scribbled addendum near the bottom. Storm ETA, 26 hours, Route A to be submerged. Retrieval arranged post-weather event. Claire's breath caught. The storm wasn't an accident. No, Noah said. It was cover. They had planned to sink the boat, make it look like a tragic accident. Julia and Mark vanish at sea. No bodies, no investigation, no trail. Then recover the vessel once the storm passed, Noah finished, voice low. Clean it, strip it, sell it. No one ever finds out what it carried. Claire touched the side of the torn manifest, her fingers trembling. But something had shifted the plan. Julia. She refused to disappear, Claire murmured. She tried to escape. She hid the phone, the journal, everything she could. And it worked, Noah said quietly. 7 years later, we're standing in the wreckage she left behind, and it's finally telling the truth. Claire looked out the window, past the clouds rolling in from the sea. If someone had staged this, someone had survived it, and they might still be out there, watching, waiting, tying up loose ends. The video was only 19 seconds long, grainy, shot at a distance, no audio. But Claire stopped breathing halfway through. A woman, barefoot, hair longer, thinner, emerged from a street market in Belize City, carrying a basket of limes and water bottles. She moved quickly, glancing over her shoulder, face partially obscured by the brim of a faded ball cap. Then, as she reached to hand a few coins to a vendor, her sleeve lifted, and there it was. A scar. Thin, pink, curved across the back of her right hand. The same scar Julia had gotten after falling through the attic trapdoor as a teenager. Claire had been there, had cried harder than Julia had. Claire stared at the paused video frame, zoomed in so close the pixels broke apart. Where did this come from? She asked. Noah stood stiffly, staring at the screen. A contractor working with the Belize Port Authority flagged it. Said she recognized the woman from a missing persons bulletin I emailed. No official timestamp, probably taken last week. Claire replayed the clip again. Each time the woman looked less like a ghost and more like someone who had learned how to live in the shadows. Why wouldn't she come home? Claire whispered. Noah didn't answer, but Claire knew. Because coming home meant being found. It meant testifying, naming names, facing the one still looking for her. Because Julia hadn't just escaped a husband. She had blown open a pipeline. This wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about who he was delivering her to. Claire stood slowly, heart pounding. We're going to Belize, Noah hesitated. What if it's not her? Claire's voice didn't waver. Then I'll keep looking. She tapped the screen once more, staring at the woman who shouldn't exist. She promised me, if she got out, she'd find a way to let me know. Tears blurred her eyes. And that scar, she whispered, that is her. A message, cut into skin. I'm alive. Come find me. The air in the terminal was dry, filled with the low murmur of delayed flights and the occasional metallic ding of boarding calls. Claire stood by the windows overlooking the tarmac, watching the jet pull into position. Its nose pointed south, toward heat, toward risk, toward her. She clutched Julia's journal tighter, its pages soft with wear, corners curled like petals left too long in the rain. The last entry echoed in her mind, the ink faint but deliberate. If I vanish, I didn't give up. I'm just where no one was supposed to find me. Claire exhaled slowly. Every step she'd taken since the boat was found had led her here, through rot and salt and memory, through lies and wreckage, through stories rewritten by the sea. And still, there was no body, no grave, only questions. Mark was gone. Whatever ring he was part of had shattered into whispers and shadows. But Julia? The scar in the video? The gate? The hesitation before handing over coins? It was her, or it had to be. The alternative was worse, that someone had used her image, that Julia had truly vanished, and the ghost Claire was chasing belonged to someone else. She couldn't let that be true. Her phone buzzed. A message from Noah. Be careful. She's not the same girl, but neither are you. Claire stared at the words for a long time before slipping the phone into her jacket. He was right. She moved toward the gate, boarding pass in hand, legs steady, not with certainty, but with resolve. As she crossed the threshold into the tunnel, the scent of fuel and metal filling her lungs, Claire whispered aloud, half to herself, half to the sister who might be waiting. You didn't come home, so I'll bring home to you. There was no closure, but there was still a trail, and sometimes love wasn't about finding answers. It was about never stopping the search. The yard was quiet at dusk, set back from the coastal highway, surrounded by rusted fencing and the hum of distant tide. The salvage yard held its breath beneath a bleeding sky. A flatbed truck creaked as it lowered the battered remains of the Lark into a cradle of concrete and steel. The men in jumpsuits didn't ask questions. They weren't paid to. They just logged the name, the GPS of recovery, and sealed it inside the records of a maritime insurance contractor no one would ever audit. The hull had been pressure washed, stripped of the barnacles and algae that had crusted over 7 years of silence. The nameplate was gone now, burned off for resale. No one noticed the slight asymmetry in the undercarriage. No one ran a hand across the rotted joint at the stern. If they had, maybe they would have felt the loosened bolts. Maybe they would have heard the faint clink of metal shifting behind it, but they didn't. And so it stayed there, tucked beneath a false panel near the engine compartment, welded shut with epoxy and panic. A second journal, smaller than the one Claire held, waterproof casing, pages lined with numbers, names, ports, code embedded in shorthand only Julia would understand. And at the back, one final note, scribbled in a shaking hand. If they find this before Claire does, it means I failed twice. Once to escape, once to warn her. But if you are Claire, keep going. I had to disappear so they couldn't use me. You have to reappear so they can't keep winning. The ocean never forgets. It just takes its time returning things. A breeze moved through the yard, lifting dust. The light faded. The door clanged shut behind the last worker, and the lark, half-gutted and silent, settled once more into stillness. It had carried love, betrayal, survival, and secrets. And now it kept one more, waiting, watching, salt-bound and silent, until someone brave enough came to listen.